Have you ever wondered if words have power? Not just the power to persuade or to hurt, but a real tangible power. Or a power that can last for centuries and reach out from the grave. People have been laying curses for as long as they've had language. They've scrawled them on lead tablets and buried them. They've whispered them over sacred objects. They've inscribed them on the walls of tombs. Most of the time, it's just angry words. But sometimes things happen. A string of coincidences starts to look like a pattern. A run of bad luck starts to feel like a plan. Is it all in our heads, or did some of these ancient curses actually work? What if a 5,000-year-old man could kill from his icy grave? What if a baseball team's fate was sealed by a goat? And what if a famous blue diamond carried with it a trail of ruin and death for anyone who dared to own it? We're going to look at some of the most famous curses in history. Stories where the line between coincidence and something else gets very, very blurry. Number 18, why did so many people connected to a mummy die? This is the big one, the curse that everyone knows. It's the story of King Tutankhamun's tomb. In November 1922, the British archaeologist Howard Carter and his sponsor Lord Carnarvon finally found it. They had been searching for years in the Valley of the Kings in Egypt, and what they found was incredible. A nearly intact royal tomb filled with treasures. The world went crazy for Egypt, but then the story started. The legend says there was an inscription on the tomb that read, "Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king." That inscription was probably a myth, a creation of the newspapers at the time to sell more copies. But people believed it, and then people started dying. The first was Lord Carnarvon himself. Just a few months after the tomb was opened, in April 1923, he died in Cairo. The official cause was blood poisoning from an infected mosquito bite, a bite he supposedly nicked while shaving. The story got stranger. At the exact moment of his death, all the lights in Cairo were said to have flickered and gone out. And back on his estate in England, his dog, Susie, howled and dropped dead. It was the perfect start to a terrifying legend. But it didn't end there. George J. Gould, a wealthy American financier, visited the tomb in 1923. He fell ill almost immediately and died from a fever a few months later. Prince Ali Kamel Fahmy Bey of Egypt also visited the tomb in 1923. He was shot and killed by his wife not long after. Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, a radiologist, x-rayed Tutankhamun's mummy before it was moved to a museum. He died in 1924 from a mysterious illness. A.C. Mace, a member of Carter's excavation team, died in 1928 from what was said to be arsenic poisoning. Richard Bethel, Lord Carnarvon's personal secretary, was found dead in his bed in 1929. The list went on. By 1930, the newspapers had linked over a dozen deaths to the curse. Of course, there's another side to the story, the skeptical side. First, that famous inscription probably never existed on the tomb entrance. It was a fabrication, likely cooked up by novelist Marie Corelli, who was fascinated with the occult and wrote a letter to a newspaper warning of the dire consequences of disturbing the pharaoh. Second, and most importantly, the main target of any curse should have been Howard Carter. He was the one who led the whole operation. He spent more time in the tomb than anyone. And he lived for another 17 years, dying in 1939 at the age of 64 from lymphoma. Many other members of the excavation team also lived long and happy lives. A study was done by Dr. Mark Nelson of Monash University in Australia and published in the British Medical Journal in 2002. He looked at the survival rates of the 44 Westerners identified as being in Egypt when the tomb was opened. He found no statistical difference between the lifespans of those who entered the tomb and those who didn't. The average age of death for the 25 people who were potentially exposed to the curse was 70. That's not very cursed. So what about the deaths that did happen? Lord Carnarvon was not in good health. He had suffered a severe car accident years earlier that left him with a weakened immune system. Egypt in the 1920s was not the most hygienic place. A simple infection could easily become deadly. The power outage in Cairo? Common at the time. The dog? A sad coincidence. But there is one scientific theory that's pretty interesting. The Tom mold theory? Some scientists, like microbiologist Dr. Ezzedine Taha, have suggested that ancient tombs could contain dormant, dangerous molds and bacteria. When the tomb was sealed, these microbes, like certain species of Aspergillus, could have been trapped inside with the air, food, and human remains. When the tomb was opened, these spores would have been released. For a healthy person, it might not be a problem. But for someone with a compromised immune system like Lord Carnarvon, inhaling these spores could lead to a fatal allergic reaction or infection. Well, it could explain some of the respiratory illnesses reported. It's a scientific explanation for a supernatural claim. But it still leaves questions. If it was mold, why didn't it affect Howard Carter, the man who was most exposed? Why did the deaths seem to cluster in such a dramatic and newsworthy way right after the discovery? And even if it's all coincidence, why does the story of the Pharaoh's curse still give us a chill almost a century later? What if the curse wasn't a supernatural force, but a psychological one, making people who believed in it more stressed and prone to accidents? If deadly microbes can survive for thousands of years in a tomb, what else is lying dormant under the sand, waiting for us to find it? Could the ancient Egyptians have known about these natural dangers and created the idea of a curse as a primitive form of a biohazard warning? But number 17, can a diamond remember the pain of its owners? Some objects just feel wrong, they have a history you can almost sense. The Hope Diamond is one of those objects. It's a stunningly beautiful stone, a 45.52 carat, deep blue diamond currently housed in the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History. But its beauty is matched only by its dark and troubled past. The story of its curse is a tangled web of myth and fact, stretching back centuries. The legend begins in the 17th century. A French gem merchant named Jean-Baptiste Tavernier supposedly stole the massive blue diamond from the eye of a statue of the Hindu goddess Sita in India. As the story goes, the priests of the temple put a curse on whoever possessed the stolen stone. Tavernier brought the gem back to France and sold it to King Louis XIV in 1668. The misfortunes started almost immediately. According to the legend, Tavernier soon fell into financial ruin and was later torn apart by wild dogs in Russia. There is no historical proof of this. Records show he died peacefully in his 80s. But the story stuck. The diamond, now called the French blue, was passed down through French royalty. King Louis XVI and his wife Marie Antoinette were the next famous owners. We all know what happened to them. They were beheaded during the French Revolution. The Princess de Lamballe, a lady in waiting to Marie Antoinette, who sometimes wore the diamond, was torn to pieces by a mob. During the chaos of the Revolution, the French blue was stolen in 1792 and disappeared for 20 years. It resurfaced in London around 1812, recut into a smaller stone. It eventually came into the possession of a wealthy London banker named Henry Philip Hope in 1839, which is where it got its modern name. The Hope family's luck seemed to sour. They fell into debt, and the family fortune dwindled. The diamond was eventually sold to pay off gambling debts. It passed through the hands of several dealers and owners, many of whom, the stories say, met with tragedy. One Russian prince, Ivan Konatovitsky, supposedly bought it and gave it to his mistress, who he then murdered. He was later killed by revolutionaries. A Greek broker named Simon Mancharides acquired it, only to drive his carriage off a cliff, killing himself and his family. These stories are juicy, but many are hard to verify and were likely embellished by jewelers to increase the stone's mystique and value. The most famous modern owner was an American mining heiress and socialite named Evelyn Walsh McLean. She bought the diamond in 1911. The jeweler Pierre Cartier cleverly presented the diamond to her by weaving a new elaborate history of its cursed past. McLean was intrigued, not scared. She wore it constantly, but her life was filled with immense tragedy. Her firstborn son, Vincent, was killed in a car accident at age 9. Her husband, Edward Ned McLean, left her for another woman, and their family newspaper, the Washington Post, went bankrupt. Ned eventually died in a mental institution. Her daughter, Evelyn, died of a drug overdose at age 25. McLean herself died in 1947, heavily in debt. After her death, her surviving children sold the diamond to jeweler Harry Winston to pay off her debts. Winston owned it for about a decade, displaying it at charity events. In 1958, he donated it to the Smithsonian, famously sending it through the U.S. mail in a plain brown paper box. The skeptical view is pretty straightforward. It's confirmation bias. We are looking for tragedy, so we find it. Rich, powerful people often live dramatic, turbulent lives. Revolutions happen, businesses fail, children have accidents, and marriages fall apart. This happens to people who don't own a famous diamond too. For every story of tragedy, there are owners who live perfectly normal lives. Harry Winston, who handled it for years, died of old age. The Smithsonian has had it for over 60 years. And while the US has had its share of troubles, it's hard to pin them on a gemstone in a museum display. The story of Tavernier being killed by dogs is almost certainly false. Many of the other tales are unverified rumors. The curse was a brilliant marketing tool, first for Cartier to sell the diamond to McLean, and later for newspapers to sell stories. But the sheer volume of tragedy surrounding the diamond, especially with Evelyn Walsh McLean, is hard to ignore. She lost almost everyone she loved. Was it just a string of horrible coincidences that happened to align with the ownership of one specific object? Or can an object, formed deep within the earth under immense pressure, somehow absorb the energy of the events happening around it? Does an object gain a reputation that then influences the behavior of its owners, leading them to be more reckless or paranoid? If the curse is just a story, why has it persisted so strongly for centuries, attaching itself to this one particular stone? Could the diamond's unique physical properties, like its rare phosphorescence, have contributed to its aura of being supernatural and otherworldly? What if we've only documented the tragedies and ignored all the quiet, happy moments the diamond has witnessed? Number 16 did an Iceman curse his discoverers. In September 1991, two German tourists, Helmut and Erika Simon, were hiking in the Ötztal Alps on the border between Austria and Italy. They strayed from the path and found something sticking out of the ice. They thought it was a doll, or perhaps the body of an unfortunate modern mountaineer. It was something far older. They had discovered the preserved body of a man who died around 300 BCE. He was named Ötzi the Iceman after the valley where he was found. It was one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. A perfectly preserved glimpse into the Copper Age. But soon, a darker story began to form around this ancient man. A story of a curse, an icy revenge from 5,000 years in the past. The first person connected to the discovery to die was Rainer Henn, a forensic pathologist who was part of the team that examined Ötzi. In 1992, just a year after the discovery, Henn, who was 64, died in a car crash. He was on his way to a conference to speak about the Iceman. It was a tragic accident. But then came another. Kurt Fritz, the mountaineer who led Henn to the body and who helped excavate it, died in an avalanche in 1993. He was 52. He was an experienced climber, but avalanches are an inherent risk of the sport. 2 deaths, a coincidence. But the media started to take notice. The idea of a curse was born. The story went quiet for over a decade. Then, in 2004, the curse seemed to return with a vengeance. Helmut Simon, the 67-year-old hiker who had originally discovered Ötzi, went missing while hiking in the same general region. A massive search was launched. 8 days later, his body was found at the bottom of a 300-foot ravine. He had fallen to his death during a sudden severe blizzard. It was a shocking and tragic end for the man who started it all. The story gets even stranger. Dieter Warnecke, the 45-year-old head of the mountain rescue team that found Helmut Simon's body, died of a heart attack less than an hour after Simon's funeral. The list continued to grow. In 2005, Konrad Spindler, an archaeologist from the University of Innsbruck and the leading expert on Ötzi, died at age 66 from complications of multiple sclerosis. Spindler had once joked in an interview, "I think it's a load of rubbish. The next thing he'll be telling me is I'll be the next victim." Tom Loy, a molecular archaeologist who discovered human blood on Ötzi's weapons and clothing, died at age 63 in his home in Australia in 2005. He was diagnosed with a hereditary blood condition shortly after he began his work on Ötzi, a condition he had not known about before. That's at least 6 people, all directly involved with the discovery, examination, or aftermath of Ötzi, who died within about 15 years. The media had a field day. The Curse of the Iceman was a headline that wrote itself. The logical explanation, of course, is that these events are unrelated. Rainer Henn died in a common car accident. Kurt Fritz died from a known risk of his profession. Helmut Simon died in a mountaineering accident, a tragedy that befalls even experienced hikers. Dieter Warnecke had a heart attack, a common cause of death for a man his age. Konrad Spindler died from a progressive disease he had for years. Tom Loy died from a pre-existing genetic condition. Most of the people involved in the Ötzi project were middle-aged or older. It is statistically normal for some people in any given group of that age to die over a 15-year period. There are hundreds of people who have worked on the Ötzi project who are still alive and well. We only focus on the ones who died because it makes for a better story, but the timing is eerie. The way the deaths cluster is unsettling. Helmut Simon's death, in particular, feels almost poetic in its tragedy, like the discoverer being claimed by the same mountains that held the discovered. And Conrad Spindler's joke about being the next victim is a chilling piece of foreshadowing. It's easy to dismiss it all as coincidence, but it's a lot of coincidence. Could there be a scientific explanation similar to the tomb mold theory for King Tut? Did Ötzi's body, frozen for 5,300 years, carry some kind of ancient, unknown microbe or pathogen for which modern humans have no immunity? Could handling the body, even with precautions, have exposed these researchers to something dangerous? Or is the curse simply the danger of the high Alps, the same environment that killed Ötzi himself? What if the curse is just the mountain itself, a dangerous and unpredictable place that takes lives now just as it did 5,000 years ago? Is it possible that the stress and pressure of being involved in such a high-profile discovery contributed to the health problems of some of these individuals? Or are we so desperate to find meaning in death that we will connect any dots, no matter how far apart, to create a story that makes sense to us? Number 15, did a Shawnee chief predict a century of presidential deaths? This curse doesn't involve a tomb or a diamond. It involves the highest office in the United States. It's often called the Curse of Tippecanoe or Tecumseh's Curse. The story is a chilling pattern of death that seemed to haunt the American presidency for over 120 years. The pattern is this: from 1840 to 1960, every president elected in a year ending in a zero died in office. The curse is said to have originated with a conflict in 1811. William Henry Harrison was the governor of the Indiana Territory. He led a force of American soldiers against a confederation of Native American tribes led by the Shawnee leader Tecumseh and his brother Tenskwatawa, known as the Prophet. The battle took place near the Tippecanoe River. Harrison's forces defeated the Native American warriors while Tecumseh was away. When Tecumseh returned, he was furious. He confronted Harrison, and according to legend, Tenskwatawa placed a curse on Harrison and all future Great White Chiefs, who would be elected in a year with the same number as Harrison's. Harrison was elected in 1840. Let's look at the list. It's hard to argue it. William Henry Harrison was elected in 1840. He gave the longest inaugural address in history on a cold, wet day without a coat or gloves. He caught pneumonia and died just 31 days into his term. He was the first president to die in office. 20 years later, Abraham Lincoln was elected in 1860. He was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth in 1865, shortly into his second term. 20 years after that, James A. Garfield was elected in 1880. He was shot by a disgruntled office seeker, Charles J. Guiteau, in July 1881. He lingered for months before dying of infection from his wounds in September. 20 years later, William McKinley was elected in 1900. It was his second term, but the election year fits. He was assassinated by an anarchist, Leon Czolgosz, in 1901. 20 years after that, Warren G. Harding was elected in 1920. He died in office in 1923, officially from a heart attack, though rumors of poisoning and scandal have surrounded his death for years. 20 years later, Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected in 1940 for his third term. He led the country through most of World War II, but died of a cerebral hemorrhage in April 1945, just months into his fourth term. 20 years after that, John F. Kennedy was elected in 1960. He was assassinated in Dallas, Texas in November 1963. The pattern is perfect. 7 presidents elected in years ending in 0, over a span of 120 years, all died in office. 4 by assassination, 3 by natural causes. The odds of this happening by chance seem incredibly slim. It's one of the most compelling curse stories because the data is so stark and clear. So, how did it end? Ronald Reagan was elected in 1980. The curse was a major topic of discussion at the time. In March 1981, just 69 days into his presidency, Reagan was shot by John Hinckley Jr. He was critically wounded. The bullet missed his heart by about an inch, but he survived. He went on to serve 2 full terms. Some say his survival broke the curse. George W. Bush, elected in 2000, also survived his 2 terms in office, though he did survive at least 1 assassination attempt overseas and was president during the 9/11 attacks. The skeptical take is that it's a stunning coincidence, a statistical anomaly. The story of Tecumseh, or his brother laying the curse, is likely an apocryphal tale that was created after the pattern started to emerge, probably around the 1930s. There's no contemporary account of the curse from 1811. Also, the job of president in the 19th and early 20th centuries was more dangerous than it is today. Medical care was primitive. A minor illness like Harrison's could be fatal. A gunshot wound that would be treatable today, like Garfield's, was a death sentence due to infection. Its security was also much more lax, making assassinations easier. The pattern is real, but the cause might be historical context, not a supernatural curse. The end of the pattern with Reagan can be explained by advances in both presidential security and emergency medical care. But still, the precision of the 20-year cycle is what makes it so unnerving. Why every 20 years, on the dot? Why did it start with Harrison, the man who was the direct cause of the conflict? And if Reagan's survival broke the curse, was it because of medical science, or did his own personal beliefs and optimism play a role? Nancy Reagan was known to consult with an astrologer, a fact that became public during his presidency. Maybe they were fighting fire with fire. Was the curse real, but simply overcome by modern technology? Or was it just a fluke of history, a series of tragedies that we, as humans, desperately tried to weave into a coherent narrative? And what if the curse wasn't just about death, but about a great national tragedy occurring during the president's term, from the Civil War to World War II to the Cold War and 9/11? Number 14 was an emperor's tomb, a Soviet Pandora's box. Some curses come with a very specific warning. In June 1941, a team of Soviet archaeologists led by Mikhail Gerasimov was in Samarkand in modern-day Uzbekistan. They were there to open the tomb of a 14th century conqueror named Timur, also known as Tamerlane. Timur was a brutal and brilliant military leader who built a vast empire. His tomb, the Gur-i-Amir, was a magnificent structure, but it also carried a warning. According to local legend and inscriptions on the tomb itself, it read, "When I rise from the dead, the world shall tremble." Another inscription supposedly said, "Whosoever opens my tomb shall unleash an invader more terrible than I." The local people and Muslim clergy were deeply opposed to the opening of the tomb. They warned the Soviet scientists of the curse, but Gerasimov and his team were men of science, working for an atheistic state. They didn't believe in curses. They were there on a mission from Stalin himself to prove that Timur was not of Mongol descent and to create a facial reconstruction from his skull. On June 20th, 1941, they proceeded. They lifted the heavy stone slab of the coffin. Inside, they found the skeleton of the great conqueror. They had succeeded. 2 days later, on June 22nd, 1941, something happened that made the world tremble. Adolf Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the massive surprise invasion of the Soviet Union. It was the largest German military operation of World War II. The invasion was catastrophic for the Soviets. The Nazis advanced rapidly, killing millions of soldiers and civilians. The Soviet Union was pushed to the brink of collapse. The timing was so precise, so perfect, that it was impossible not to connect the two events. The scientists had opened the tomb, and 2 days later, an invader more terrible than Timur was unleashed upon their country. The story gets even more compelling. The war went disastrously for the Soviet Union for the next year and a half. The turning point of the war on the Eastern Front was the Battle of Stalingrad. The battle raged from late 1942 into early 1943. It was one of the bloodiest battles in human history. According to some accounts, Stalin, who was known to be superstitious despite his public atheism, became convinced that the curse was real. In late 1942, he ordered that Timur's remains be returned to his tomb with full Islamic burial rites. The reburial took place on December 20th, 1942. Shortly after, the Soviet Army launched Operation Uranus, the counteroffensive that surrounded and destroyed the German Sixth Army at Stalingrad. The Soviet victory at Stalingrad is widely considered the major turning point of the war. After the reburial of Timur, the tide of the war turned in the Soviet Union's favor. The skeptical explanation is, of course, that this is a classic case of confusing correlation with causation. Operation Barbarossa was a massive military undertaking that had been planned by Hitler for many months. The date of the invasion was determined by military logistics, weather, and strategy, not by the actions of a few archaeologists in Samarkand. It is a pure, albeit astounding, coincidence that the tomb was opened just 48 hours before the invasion began. The timing of the Soviet victory at Stalingrad is also explainable by military factors. The German army was overstretched, undersupplied, and not prepared for the brutal Russian winter. The Soviet counterattack was well planned and took advantage of German weaknesses. The reburial of Timur had nothing to do with it, but the power of the story lies in its narrative perfection. A warning ignored, a catastrophic consequence, a wrong that is righted, leading to a reversal of fortune. It's a story that feels true, regardless of the facts. Even the historian who was present, Malik Kayumov, who filmed the exhumation, spent the rest of his life warning people about the curse. He claimed he showed the inscriptions to the Soviet team, but they ignored him. Did the act of desecrating the tomb create a psychological blow to the morale of the superstitious Russian people and soldiers, which was only restored when the remains were returned? Could Stalin, a notoriously paranoid and superstitious leader, have made different military decisions based on his belief in the curse, inadvertently leading to the victory? Or is it possible that some forces exist that we don't understand, and that a warning carved in stone 600 years ago should have been heeded? What if other historical turning points are linked to similar, forgotten events? Number 13. Did the man who found China's terracotta army pay a price? In 1974, a group of farmers were digging a well in Shaanxi province, China. One of them, a man named Yang Jifa, hit something hard with his shovel. It wasn't a rock. It was the head of a clay soldier. What he had found would become one of the most astonishing archaeological discoveries ever made the terracotta army. Thousands of life-size clay soldiers, horses, and chariots buried for over 2,000 years to guard the tomb of China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang. The emperor was a powerful, ruthless ruler obsessed with immortality. He unified China, but he also burned books and buried scholars alive. His tomb is a massive, unexcavated necropolis, and the clay army was just its outer guard. The discovery brought Yang Jifa and his fellow farmers instant fame. The Chinese government recognized the immense historical value of the site. The land was confiscated for the state. The farmers were paid a small fee, and their homes were demolished to make way for the massive museum and excavation site that stands there today. And this is where the curse begins. It's not a curse of sudden death or supernatural horror, but a slow, grinding curse of misfortune and poverty. Here Yang Zifa, the man who made the discovery, received a reward that was less than a year's salary for the average worker at the time. He and his neighbors lost their land, their only source of livelihood. They were forced to move. As the terracotta army became a global tourist destination, bringing in millions of dollars, the original discoverers were largely forgotten. Yang Jifa ended up working in the museum gift shop, signing books for tourists for a meager wage. He was quoted in a 2007 South China Morning Post article saying he wished he had never found the soldiers. Other farmers who were there that day fell on hard times. Some died in poverty. One took his own life. Their lives were not improved by their world-changing discovery. They were arguably ruined by it. The curse, in this case, seems to be a very human one. It's the curse of bureaucracy of a state that values ancient artifacts more than the living people who found them. The misfortune isn't supernatural, it's economic. But there's another layer to it. The tomb of Qin Shi Huang himself remains sealed, and for good reason. Ancient Chinese historian Sima Qian wrote that the tomb contains a map of the empire with rivers of flowing mercury and is protected by crossbows rigged to fire on anyone who enters. Modern scientific surveys have detected unusually high levels of mercury in the soil around the tomb mound, suggesting the ancient accounts might be true. The Chinese government has no plans to open the main tomb, partly out of respect for the dead, but also out of fear. Fear of what they might find, fear of what they might unleash, and fear that our current technology is not advanced enough to preserve whatever is inside. So the curse here is twofold. There's the sad real-life curse that fell upon the farmers who were displaced and unrewarded for their find. Their lives were turned upside down by a system that didn't care about them. Then there is the potential ancient curse of the emperor's tomb itself, a place so feared that even the modern state won't touch it. The emperor who built this incredible army to protect him in the afterlife was not a man who would want to be disturbed. His rule was defined by control, and it's easy to imagine him placing powerful curses to ensure his final resting place remained his alone. Is the misfortune of the farmers just a sad story of social and economic injustice, or is it a sign of the emperor's displeasure, a subtle warning shot to anyone else who would disturb his legacy? What will happen if and when humanity decides to open the central tomb? Are the legends of mercury rivers and booby traps real, and are they a form of ancient, practical curse designed to kill intruders? Could the real curse be our own greed and curiosity, driving us to disturb places that were meant to be left alone? Number 12, can a goat really decide a baseball championship? Some curses are ancient and profound. Others start in a tavern with a smelly goat. This is the story of the curse of the Billy Goat, one of the most famous curses in the history of American sports. It haunted the Chicago Cubs baseball team for 71 years. The year was 1945. The Cubs were in the World Series, playing against the Detroit Tigers. On October 6th, for Game 4 of the series, a local tavern owner named William Billy Goat Cianis went to Wrigley Field to watch the game. He was a huge Cubs fan, and he brought his pet goat, Murphy, with him. He had a ticket for the goat and everything. But other fans complained about the smell. The ushers told Cianis he had to leave. Cianis was outraged. As he was being escorted out, he allegedly threw his arms up and declared, "The Cubs ain't gonna win no more. The Cubs will never win a World Series so long as the GOAT is not allowed in Wrigley Field." At the time, the Cubs were leading the series 2-1. They lost Game 4 that day. They went on to lose the World Series to the Tigers, and then they just kept losing. Not just losing, but finding new and heartbreaking ways to lose. For the next 71 years, the Cubs did not win a World Series. They didn't even play in one. They became known as the lovable losers. The curse became a core part of the team's identity. The history of the Cubs after 1945 is a long list of bizarre and tragic failures. In 1969, they had a huge lead in their division late in the season. A black cat walked onto the field and crossed in front of their dugout at Shea Stadium in New York. Their lead evaporated and they missed the playoffs. In 1984, they were just one win away from the World Series. They had a commanding lead in the decisive final game against the San Diego Padres when a routine ground ball went right through the legs of their first baseman, Leon Durham. The Padres rallied and won. In 2003, they were, again, just one win away, leading 3-0 in the 8th inning against the Florida Marlins. A fan, Steve Bartman, reached out and deflected a foul ball that a Cubs player was about to catch. The Cubs completely fell apart after that play, gave up 8 runs in the inning, lost the game, and lost the series the next day. It seemed like some force was actively working against them. Over the years, people tried everything to break the curse. Billy Cianis' nephew, Sam Cianis, was brought to Wrigley Field with a goat multiple times. They had Greek Orthodox priests sprinkle holy water on the dugout. They tried everything. Nothing worked. The skeptical view is obvious. Curses aren't real. The Cubs were just a poorly managed baseball team for a very long time. They made bad trades, had bad luck with injuries, and were often just not good enough to win. The curse was a fun narrative, a convenient excuse for decades of failure. The black cat, the error by Durham, the Bartman incident, these are just moments of human error and bad luck that happen in sports. The only reason they are so famous is because they fit the pre-existing narrative of the curse. Good teams overcome bad breaks. The Cubs, for many years, were not a good enough team. But then came 2016. The Cubs had built a fantastic young team. They made it to the World Series against the Cleveland Indians. The series went to a deciding Game 7, and in true Cubs fashion, it was a nail-biter. The Cubs blew a late lead. The game went into extra innings. A rain delay happened, adding to the drama. But in the end, in the bottom of the 10th inning, the Chicago Cubs finally won. The curse was broken. It took 71 years, exactly as long as Billy Cianis had lived. The final out was made at 12:47 a.m. on November 3rd, 2016. At that moment, it was the 71st anniversary of Billy Cianis' death, to the day in his native Greece. The coincidences just piled up. Was the curse a real, supernatural force that was finally overcome by a team that was just too good to be denied? Or was the belief in the curse a psychological weight that held the team back for decades, a weight that was finally lifted by a new generation of players who didn't believe in it? If it was all just bad management and bad luck, how do you explain the sheer number of statistically improbable, bizarre, and heartbreaking events that all happened to one team? And what was it about the year 2016 that finally allowed the GOAT to be satisfied? Number 11 was a horror movie set, actually haunted. Sometimes art imitates life, and sometimes life seems to imitate art in the most terrifying way. The Poltergeist curse is a legend that grew up around the 1982 horror film Poltergeist and its sequels. The movie is about a suburban family whose home is haunted by angry spirits. It was a huge box office hit, but a dark cloud hangs over the production. a series of tragic and untimely deaths of actors involved in the trilogy. The curse, many believe, was triggered by a fateful decision made during the making of the first film. The story goes that for the iconic scene where the mother, Diane Freeling, played by JoBeth Williams, is dragged into a swimming pool filled with skeletons, the production team used real human skeletons. They were cheaper to acquire from a medical supply company than plastic props. Williams and other cast members were reportedly not told they were real until after the scene was shot. Many people believe that using these real remains without respect for the dead opened some kind of doorway and unleashed a curse on the production and its cast. The list of tragedies is chilling. The first and most well-known victim was Dominique Dunne, the 22-year-old actress who played the family's oldest daughter, Dana. Just a few months after the film was released in 1982, she was murdered by her abusive ex-boyfriend. It was a brutal and shocking crime that cut short a promising career. Then came the second film, Poltergeist, the second The Other Side, released in 1986. Julian Beck, the 60-year-old actor who played the terrifying, skeletal villain, Reverend Henry Kane, died of stomach cancer during the film's production. His gaunt appearance in the film was due to his illness. Will Sampson, the 53-year-old actor who played the benevolent Native American shaman Taylor, died of complications from a heart-lung transplant a year after the second film was released. Sampson had reportedly performed a real exorcism on the set to cleanse it of angry spirits. The darkest tragedy is associated with the youngest star of the series, Heather O'Rourke. She played the iconic role of Carol Ann, the little girl who spoke to the spirits through the television, famous for the line, "They're here." She starred in all three films. In 1988, during the post-production of Poltergeist III, O'Rourke, who was only 12 years old, became suddenly ill. She was misdiagnosed with Crohn's disease, but was actually suffering from an acute bowel obstruction that she had likely had from birth. She died on the operating table from septic shock. Her death was so sudden and tragic, it cemented the idea of the curse in the public imagination. 4 key actors from the trilogy dead under tragic and premature circumstances. The rational explanation is that these are all separate, unconnected tragedies. Dominique Dunne's death was a horrific act of domestic violence. Julian Beck was diagnosed with cancer long before he was cast in the film. Will Sampson had a chronic degenerative condition. Heather O'Rourke's death was a tragic medical emergency caused by a congenital defect. There is no logical link between these events, other than the fact that they all happened to people who worked on the same film series. Many other actors and crew members from the films, like JoBeth Williams, Craig T. Nelson, and director Tobe Hooper, have lived long lives. The human brain is designed to see patterns, and the pattern of deaths surrounding these films is just prominent enough for us to create a supernatural narrative around it. And yet, the use of real human skeletons in the first film is a genuinely unsettling fact. It feels like a line was crossed. JoBeth Williams has said in interviews that she would come home from the set and find pictures on her walls were crooked every single day. She would straighten them, and the next day they would be crooked again. Will Sampson, a real-life shaman, felt the need to perform a spiritual cleansing of the set. That suggests the atmosphere during production was strange, at the very least. Is it possible that using real human remains for a film about angry spirits was an act of profound disrespect that attracted some form of negative energy? Could the belief in the curse itself have created a dark atmosphere that hung over the subsequent productions? Or is this simply one of Hollywood's darkest and most tragic coincidences, a story we tell ourselves because the randomness of death is too frightening to accept on its own? What other film sets have secrets we don't know about? Number 10. Can a car be born evil? Objects can't be evil, can they? They're just metal, glass, and rubber. But the story of James Dean's Porsche 550 Spider might make you wonder. Dean, the iconic Hollywood actor and symbol of teenage rebellion, bought the car in September 1955. It was a small, lightweight, and incredibly fast car. When another actor, Alec Guinness, who would later play Obi-Wan Kenobi, saw the car, he had a strange premonition. He told Dean, "If you get in that car, you will be found dead in it by this time next week." That was on September 23rd, 1955. 7 days later, on September 30th, James Dean was driving his Spider to a race in Salinas, California. He nicknamed the car Little Bastard. On U.S. Route 466, a college student driving a Ford Tudor pulled out in front of him. They collided head-on. James Dean, at the age of 24, was killed instantly. His passenger, a German mechanic named Rolf Wutherich, was thrown from the car and survived with serious injuries. The driver of the other car, Donald Turnipseed, suffered only minor injuries. Alec Guinness's warning had come true to the day. This is where the story should end. A tragic car accident. But the story of Little Bastard was just beginning. The car was a total wreck, but the famous car customizer George Barris bought the remains. The car immediately seemed to resist. It slipped off its trailer while being unloaded, fell on a mechanic, and broke both of his legs. This was the start of the curse. Barris decided to sell the car off for parts. The engine was sold to a doctor and amateur racer named Troy McHenry. He put the engine in his own race car. During a race in 1956, McHenry lost control, hit a tree, and was killed instantly. In the same race, another doctor, William Eschgrid, was racing with the drivetrain from Little Bastard in his car. His car locked up and rolled over, seriously injuring him. Barris sold 2 of the tires from the Spider. The man who bought them was driving a short time later when both tires blew out simultaneously, causing his car to run off the road. Because of its grim reputation, Barris decided to loan the chassis of Little Bastard to the California Highway Patrol for a traveling safety exhibit. The first place it was displayed was a garage. The garage caught fire and burned to the ground. Everything was destroyed except for the car, which survived with barely a scratch. At the next exhibit, at a high school, the car fell off its display and broke a student's hip. The curse continued to follow the car. While being transported on a flatbed truck, the driver lost control. The driver was thrown clear, but he was killed when the wreckage of Little Bastard fell off the back of the truck and crushed him. The car fell off trucks 2 more times while being transported, though no one was hurt. It was involved in several other minor strange incidents. Finally, in 1960, the car was being shipped back to Los Angeles from a safety exhibit in Florida. It was loaded into a sealed boxcar on a train. When the train arrived in LA, the boxcar seal was still intact, but the car was gone. It had completely vanished. It has never been seen since. The skeptical take is that this is a collection of urban legends and embellished stories, all strung together by George Barris himself to create a mythology around his famous possession. Barris was a showman, and the story of the cursed car was good for business. Many of the incidents are hard to verify with independent sources. Car racing in the 1950s was incredibly dangerous, so the deaths of McHenry and the injury to Eschgrid are not statistically surprising. Tires blow out. Fires happen, things fall. These might just be a string of unfortunate events linked together by a good storyteller. But Alec Guinness's premonition is hard to dismiss, and the sheer number of bizarre and tragic events connected to one single object is staggering, even if some are exaggerated. The car's final mysterious disappearance is the perfect ending to a ghost story. Can an object become cursed or imbued with negative energy through its association with a violent, traumatic event like Dean's death? Was the car somehow flawed from the beginning, leading to its string of accidents? Or is the curse a story that grew over time, a folktale for the automotive age? And where is Little Bastard now? Is it sitting in some forgotten garage waiting for its next victim? Number 9. Can a family be cursed for generations? Most curses are tied to an object or a place, but some seem to follow a bloodline. The curse of the House of Atreus is one of the oldest and most brutal curse stories in Western culture, coming to us from ancient Greek mythology. It's a horrifying cycle of betrayal, murder, cannibalism, and revenge that plagued a royal family for generations. It shows how one terrible act can echo through time. The story starts with Tantalus. He was a king who was favored by the gods and was even allowed to dine with them on Mount Olympus. But he became arrogant. To test the gods' omniscience, he did something unthinkable. He killed his own son, Pelops, cooked him into a stew, and served him to the gods. The gods were horrified. They immediately knew what he had done. They condemned Tantalus to an eternity of punishment in the underworld, to stand in a pool of water under a fruit tree. Whenever he bent to drink, the water would recede. Whenever he reached for fruit, the branches would pull away. This is where we get the word tantalize. The gods brought Pelops back to life, but a dark curse was placed on Tantalus and all of his descendants. The curse played out through his children and their children. Pelops had 2 sons, Atreus and Thyestes. They viciously competed for the throne of Mycenae. Atreus eventually won, but he learned that his wife had been having an affair with his brother Thyestes. Atreus' revenge was even more horrific than his father's crime. He pretended to reconcile with Thyestes and invited him to a feast. But he had killed Thyestes' two young sons and served them to him for dinner. After Thyestes had finished eating, Atreus brought out the heads and hands of the children to show him what he had done. Thyestes fled in horror, placing another curse on Atreus and his line. The curse continued. Atreus had two sons, Agamemnon and Menelaus. They are famous from the story of the Trojan War. Agamemnon led the Greek armies to Troy. When he returned home victorious after 10 years, his wife Clytemnestra, who was angry that he had sacrificed their daughter Iphigenia to get favorable winds for the journey to Troy, murdered him in his bathtub. Agamemnon's son Orestes was then duty-bound by the customs of the time to avenge his father. He returned and killed his own mother, Clytemnestra, and her lover. This act of matricide brought upon him the wrath of the Furies, terrifying deities who punished those who killed their own kin. Orestes was driven mad and tormented until he was finally absolved by the goddess Athena in a trial, which is said to have been the first court of law. This trial is what finally brought the bloody cycle of the curse to an end. This is, of course, a myth. It's a story told by ancient Greek playwrights like Aeschylus and Euripides. There's no scientific evidence, but it's a powerful story about how violence begets violence. The curse isn't necessarily a supernatural force, it's a pattern of generational trauma. A father's crime sets a precedent for his son's revenge, which then demands another act of vengeance, and so on. The children of this family were raised in an environment of violence, betrayal, and a thirst for power. It's not surprising they grew up to repeat the sins of their parents. The curse is a way to explain the seemingly unbreakable cycle of human brutality. It's a psychological curse. This ancient story was a way for the Greeks to explore deep questions about justice, revenge, and fate. Was the family doomed by a divine curse, or did they make their own choices that led to their destruction? It's a question that we still grapple with today when we talk about cycles of poverty, abuse, and violence in our own societies. Does a great crime create a kind of moral debt that is passed down through a family? How much of our lives are determined by the actions and traumas of our ancestors? Is the idea of a family curse just a way of avoiding personal responsibility, or does it acknowledge a powerful truth about how trauma is inherited? And what does it take to finally break such a cycle? Number 8, does this diamond only harm men? While the Hope Diamond has the most famous curse, it's not the only giant gemstone with a bloody history. The Koh-i-Noor, which means Mountain of Light in Persian, is one of the largest cut diamonds in the world, weighing in at over 105 carats. It has a long, complicated, and violent history, and it carries a very specific curse. It is said to bring great misfortune or death to any man who owns it. Only a woman or God can wear it safely. The diamond's origins are murky, but it is believed to have been mined in India centuries ago. The first verifiable record of it comes from the 16th century, in the possession of the Mughal emperors who ruled India. For hundreds of years, the diamond was passed between various rulers in India, Persia, and Afghanistan. This was not a peaceful process. The diamond's history is a story of conquest, murder, blinding, and torture, as one ruler took it from another by force. The Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan, who built the Taj Mahal, was imprisoned by his own son, who took the diamond. The Persian ruler Nader Shah invaded India in the 18th century and tricked the Mughal emperor into giving him the stone. Nader Shah was assassinated not long after. The diamond then passed through the hands of his successors, who also met violent ends. It eventually made its way back to India, to the Sikh ruler Ranjit Singh. After his death, his kingdom collapsed in a series of assassinations and wars. The first written mention of the curse comes from a Hindu text from the time of the first confirmed owner. The text states, "He who owns this diamond will own the world, but will also know all its misfortunes. Only God, or a woman, can wear it with impunity." In 1849, after the British conquered the Punjab region of India, the diamond was ceded to Queen Victoria as part of a treaty. It was shipped to Britain and displayed at the Great Exhibition in 1851. It was recut to enhance its brilliance, which reduced its size considerably. Prince Albert, Victoria's husband, supervised the recutting. He died 10 years later at the age of 42. After his death, Queen Victoria wore the diamond, and the curse seemed to go dormant. She ruled over the vast British Empire for decades. Since then, the Koh-i-Noor has only been worn by female members of the British royal family. It was part of the crown of Queen Alexandra, wife of Edward VII, then Queen Mary, wife of George V, and then Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, wife of George VI. It currently sits in the Tower of London as part of the crown jewels. The skeptical take is that the diamond's history is simply a reflection of the violent times and places it came from. It was owned by powerful rulers who were constantly at war and at risk of assassination. Of course, their lives were full of misfortune. The diamond didn't cause the violence. The violence was the reason the diamond changed hands so often. The curse was likely a legend created to explain this long history of bloodshed. Once it came into the possession of the stable British monarchy and was designated for women only, the misfortunes stopped because the context had changed. The British Empire certainly had its share of misfortunes, but it's impossible to link them directly to a diamond worn by the Queen Consort. But the pattern is remarkably consistent. For centuries, any man who held the diamond as a symbol of his power seemed to lose that power, and often his life in a violent way. The curse is so specific misfortune for men, but not for women. And the British royal family has taken the legend seriously enough to maintain the tradition of it only being passed to the female line for over 150 years. When Prince Charles eventually becomes king, his wife, Camilla, will wear the crown containing the Koh-i-Noor, not him. Is the curse just a coincidence of history, a narrative applied after the fact to a period of intense political instability? Or is there something to the idea of an object having a gendered energy or power? Why has this particular legend been taken so seriously by a modern institution like the British monarchy? And what would happen if a future king decided to defy tradition and wear the Koh-i-Noor himself? Number 7. Could a wine cabinet contain a malicious spirit? Most of the curses we've looked at are ancient, but some are much more recent. The story of the Dybbuk box is a product of the internet age. It started in 2003 with an eBay listing. The seller, a man named Kevin Mannis, listed an old wooden wine cabinet, but his description was anything but ordinary. He claimed the box was haunted by a Dybbuk, which in Jewish folklore is a malicious spirit that can possess the living. According to Mannis, the story began in 2001 when he bought the box at an estate sale. The seller was the granddaughter of a Polish Holocaust survivor who had recently died at the age of 103. The granddaughter explained that the box had been kept in her grandmother's sewing room and was never, ever to be opened. She said her grandmother told her it contained a Dybbuk. Mannis, a curious antique dealer, bought the box anyway. He took it back to his shop and decided to open it. Inside, he found two 1920s pennies, a lock of blonde hair tied with cord, a lock of black hair tied with cord, a small statue engraved with a Hebrew word, a dried rosebud, a single candlestick, and a small golden wine goblet. Strange things started to happen immediately. Mannis left the box in his workshop. He got a frantic call from his employee, who said the lights had gone out, the doors had locked on their own, and she could hear terrifying sounds coming from the basement. When Mannis investigated, he found the source of the sound was the box, and there was a strong smell of cat urine in the air, though he had no cats. He decided to give the box as a gift to his mother. The day he gave it to her, she suffered a major stroke. Mannis tried to give the box away to other people, but it was always returned to him within days, with the new owners complaining of strange smells, nightmares, and a feeling of dread. Mannis himself started having a recurring nightmare where he was being tormented by a terrifying old hag. He later found that everyone who had owned the box had the same dream. He started seeing shadow figures in his home. His health began to fail. Finally, terrified, he decided to sell it on eBay, with a full disclosure of its supposed paranormal history. The winning bidder was a college student named Iosif Nitsky. He and his roommates documented their experiences with the box online. They reported strange lights, hair falling out, insects appearing out of nowhere, and electronic devices malfunctioning. He sold it on eBay again. The next owner was Jason Haxton, a museum curator in Missouri. Haxton was a skeptic, but was intrigued by the story. He began to experience his own set of strange phenomena. He developed a skin condition, started coughing up blood, and would wake up with strange welts and hives all over his body. He contacted Kevin Mannis and the previous owners, and he meticulously researched the box's history, eventually writing a book about it in 2011. He even consulted with rabbis who advised him to seal the box and bury it. The story became a viral internet sensation, a modern piece of folklore. It inspired the 2012 horror film The Possession. The skeptical view is that this is a brilliant piece of storytelling, perfectly suited for the internet. Kevin Mannis is a creative writer and antique dealer. He could have fabricated the entire backstory to make an ordinary object more valuable and interesting. The subsequent owners who reported strange events could have been influenced by the power of suggestion. If you are told an object is haunted, you are more likely to interpret every strange noise, bad dream, or bit of bad luck as evidence of the haunting. This is known as the priming effect in psychology. Jason Haxton, the curator, had a vested interest in the story being true, as he was writing a book about it. There's no scientific proof of anything supernatural happening. However, in 2021, Kevin Mannis gave an interview where he admitted he had fabricated parts of the story. He said he was having a hard time and just started writing. He made up the Holocaust survivor story. He did have strange experiences, but he embellished them to create a narrative. But even with this admission, the story doesn't completely die. Jason Haxton and others who own the box maintain that their experiences were real, regardless of the origin story. They believe the object itself has something wrong with it. Did Mannis create a story that was so powerful it actually made the object haunted in the minds of subsequent owners? Or did he tap into a real phenomenon and just create a more compelling backstory for it? Can a collective belief in a curse actually give an object power? And even if the origin is a hoax, does that invalidate the real fear and experiences of the people who own the box later? Number 6, do you have to apologize to a doll? In the town of Key West, Florida, there is a museum that houses one of the most famously cursed objects in America. It's not a jewel or an ancient relic, it's a child's doll. His name is Robert. And he's a 3-foot-tall doll stuffed with wood wool, with beady black eyes and a stitched, unsettling smirk. And according to legend, he is very much alive. The story begins around the year 1904. The doll was given as a gift to a young boy named Robert Eugene Jean Otto. The story often told is that the doll was given to him by a servant who worked for the family, a woman of Bahamian descent who was skilled in voodoo and was unhappy with the Otto family. She supposedly cursed the doll before giving it to the boy. Jean became inseparable from the doll. He named it Robert after himself. He would talk to the doll for hours, but soon his parents began to hear him talking to the doll, and then hearing another different voice answer back. Strange things began to happen in the Otto house. Jean would blame the doll for any mischief. If a vase was broken or a room was messed up, Jean would say, "Robert did it." His neighbors claimed they could see the doll moving from window to window when the family was out. Guests reported hearing giggling and footsteps coming from the attic where Robert was kept. Jean grew up, but he kept the doll, he became an artist, and he would set Robert up in a chair to watch him as he painted. His wife, Anne, was terrified of the doll. She insisted it be kept locked in the attic. Jean reluctantly agreed, but people who visited the house still reported hearing strange noises from upstairs. After Jean died in 1974, Anne sold the house and left Robert behind in the attic. The new family who moved in had a 10-year-old daughter. She quickly found Robert in the attic, but she soon became terrified of him. She claimed the doll was alive, that it tormented her at night, and that it wanted to kill her. The family reported hearing the doll run around the house at night. Eventually, the doll was donated to the Fort East Martello Museum in Key West in 1994, where it remains today. But the curse didn't end. Robert sits in a glass case in the museum. The staff claim that strange things still happen. Electronic equipment malfunctions near the display. Staff members hear strange noises at night. But the curse has taken on a new form. Visitors are supposed to be respectful to the doll. You must ask his permission before you take his picture. If you don't, or if you mock him, you will be cursed. The museum has a wall covered with letters sent to Robert. They are letters of apology from people who took his picture without asking or made fun of him, and then experienced a string of terrible luck car accidents, job losses, divorces, illnesses, and other misfortunes. They write to the doll begging for his forgiveness so the curse will be lifted. The logical explanation is that this is a fantastic piece of local folklore that has become a successful tourist attraction. The story of the voodoo curse is a classic trope. The stories from the Otto family are old, unverifiable, and likely the product of a child's active imagination. Robert did it. The modern curse on museum visitors is a classic example of confirmation bias and suggestion. People hear the story, and when something bad inevitably happens in their life, they attribute it to the doll. The letters of apology just reinforce the legend for future visitors, and yet, the sheer volume of letters is unsettling. The museum receives several a week. The stories they tell are filled with genuine fear and desperation. The staff at the museum, people who are around the doll every day, are convinced there is something strange about it. They treat the doll with a mixture of affection and genuine respect as if it were a person. Is Robert the doll just a creepy-looking toy with a good backstory, or did a child's intense belief and affection somehow animate an inanimate object, a psychological phenomenon known as a tulpa? Could the story of the curse have become a self-fulfilling prophecy, where belief itself is what causes the bad luck? And what is it about dolls in particular that makes them such perfect vessels for our fears? Number 5. Could a mass-produced painting be a fire starter? This is one of the strangest curse stories, centered not on a single object, but on thousands of identical mass-produced prints. In the 1980s, a strange phenomenon was reported across Great Britain. A series of house fires would occur, and in each case, the house would be gutted by the flames. But amidst the blackened ruins, firefighters would find one object miraculously unharmed, a print of a painting known as the Crying Boy. The painting itself is kitschy and sentimental. It depicts a young, tearful, rosy-cheeked boy. It was a popular piece of art, sold in department stores across the UK in the 1960s and 70s. There wasn't just one painting, it was a series of similar paintings of crying children, created by an Italian artist named Bruno Amadeo, who worked under the name Giovanni Bergolin. The story broke in a big way in September 1985, when the British tabloid newspaper The Sun published an article with the headline "Blazing Curse of the Crying Boy." The article told the story of a firefighter in Yorkshire who claimed to have found dozens of these prints, completely unscathed, in the wreckage of numerous house fires. The story exploded. The Sun was inundated with calls from readers who had similar stories. They had owned a Crying Boy print, had a fire, and the print was the only thing to survive. The legend grew. The boy in the painting was said to be an orphan whose parents had died in a fire. The artist, Braglin, had taken him in, but the boy's presence was followed by a series of fires at the artist's studio. The artist painted the boy's portrait, and the curse was transferred to the image. The public panic was real. People were terrified of having the painting in their homes. The Sun organized a massive Halloween bonfire, and hundreds of readers sent in their Crying Boy prints to be burned and have the curse exorcised. The rational explanation for this is a fascinating mix of science and psychology. A 2010 BBC radio show called Punt PI investigated the phenomenon. They found a few key things. First, the prints were treated with a varnish that contained a fire retardant. This would make them more resistant to catching fire than other items in a room. Second, they were printed on a very dense, high-quality pressboard, which is harder to burn than regular paper or canvas. The most likely sequence of events in a fire is that the painting would fall off the wall face down. The string holding it would burn through first. Once on the floor, the fire retardant, varnish on the front, and the dense board on the back would protect it from the flames above. So there was a scientific reason for the print's survival. What about the fires themselves? Was the painting causing them? Almost certainly not. The fires were likely caused by common household accidents like faulty wiring or unattended cooking. The UK in the 1970s and 80s had a higher rate of house fires than today due to different safety standards. The Crying Boy was an incredibly popular mass-produced print. If you have a million prints in circulation, it is statistically inevitable that some of them will be present in homes that have fires. It's another case of confirmation bias. No one ever wrote to the newspaper to say, "I own a Crying Boy print, and my house did not burn down." We only hear about the strange cases where the two events coincided, but the legend is so powerful. The image of a single, tear-streaked face staring out from a scene of total devastation is deeply unsettling. It feels symbolic, and the idea of an object being immune to the destruction it supposedly causes is a classic element of a good horror story. Did the fire retardant varnish story fully explain the phenomenon, or were there cases where the survival of the print defied even that explanation? How much did the media, particularly The Sun, create the panic versus just reporting on it? And could the collective fear and belief of thousands of people have somehow activated a latent negative energy associated with the sad image? What if the original artist really did have a traumatic experience that he somehow embedded in the painting? Number 4, did a silver vase bring death to all its owners? Some cursed objects have a long and well-documented history. Others appear out of nowhere, leave a trail of destruction, and then vanish again. The Bassano vase is one of the latter. Its story is short, brutal, and mysterious. The legend begins in the 15th century, in a small village near Naples, Italy. A young bride was getting married. On her wedding night, she was murdered, clutching a silver vase that she had been given as a wedding present. As she lay dying, she supposedly swore that she would have her revenge and that the vase would bring death to anyone who owned it. After her death, her family hid the vase away. For centuries, it was lost to history. It resurfaced in 1988. A young man reportedly dug it up in his garden. The spot where he found it was said to be an ancient burial ground. Inside the vase, there was a small piece of parchment with a simple warning, "Beware. This vase brings death." The man, ignoring the warning, sold the vase to a local pharmacy. The pharmacist owned it for 3 months and then died mysteriously. His family sold the vase to a surgeon who owned it for 2 months before he died. The next owner was an archaeologist who bought it for his collection. He owned it for 3 months and then died of a sudden heart attack. The next owner died within a month. By this point, the vase had a terrifying reputation in the small town. The families of the victims knew about the connection. The story goes that the family of the last victim, realizing the pattern, tried to throw the vase out of a window. A policeman stopped them and was about to give them a ticket for littering. They told him the story of the vase. The policeman, not wanting to take any chances, tried to give the vase to a museum, but no museum would accept it. Finally, the police reportedly buried the vase in a secret location, possibly in an ancient cemetery, inside a lead coffin. It has not been seen since. This story is very difficult to verify. It exists mostly as a piece of folklore, repeated in books about curses and on paranormal websites. There are no specific names, dates, or official records attached to the deaths. It makes it very easy for a skeptic to dismiss the entire thing as a modern urban legend, a campfire story. The narrative is almost too perfect: the murdered bride, the hidden warning, the rapid succession of deaths, and the final, mysterious burial by the authorities. It has all the elements of a great ghost story. It's possible the entire tale was fabricated. But if it is true, it's one of the most potent and fast-acting curses on record. Unlike the Hope Diamond, whose curse unfolds over years, the Bassano vase seemed to work within months. The object itself is also interesting. Silver is a metal that has long been associated with spiritual and mystical properties, both for good, like its supposed ability to harm werewolves, and for ill. The fact that it was supposedly buried in a lead box is also significant. Lead has historically been considered a metal that can contain or block spiritual energies. If the story is just a legend, why was it created? What fear or local event inspired it? If the vase is real, where is it now? Could someone one day stumble upon a lead box buried in an Italian field and unleash the curse again? What if the curse was not supernatural but physical? Could the vase have been made from or contained a toxic substance that slowly poisoned its owners? That might explain the series of deaths in a pre-scientific age, which would then be interpreted as a curse. Number 3. What did the Romans wish upon their enemies? Curses aren't always grand pronouncements by priests or dying brides. Sometimes they are personal, petty, and angry. The Roman curse tablets, known as depictiones, are a perfect example. These were a common form of magic in the Greco-Roman world. If someone stole your cloak, or your lover left you, or you wanted an opposing chariot team to crash, you wouldn't just get mad. Or you would get a thin sheet of lead or pewter, inscribe your curse on it with a stylus, and then deposit it in a place you believed was close to the gods of the underworld, like a well, a spring, or a grave. One of the largest collections of these tablets was found in the English city of Bath, which the Romans called Aquae Sulis. The natural hot springs there were dedicated to the goddess Sulis Minerva. The Romans believed this was a powerful place, a gateway to the underworld, and they filled it with their curses. Over 130 tablets have been recovered from the sacred spring, and they provide an incredible personal glimpse into the daily lives and frustrations of Roman citizens. These aren't curses about death and destruction, most of them are about theft. A typical tablet might read to the goddess Sulis Minerva, "I give to your divinity and majesty my bathing tunic and cloak. Do not allow sleep or health to him who has done me wrong. whether man or woman, whether slave or free, unless he reveals himself and brings those goods to your temple. The language is often legalistic, like a contract with the goddess. The victim gives the stolen item to the goddess, so now the thief has stolen from a deity, a much more serious crime. The curses often request specific, painful, and bizarre punishments, like let the thief become as liquid as the water, or for their intestines to be eaten away. Some curses were about love, trying to bind a lover or break up a rival relationship. Others were related to legal cases or business disputes. What's fascinating is how widespread this practice was. These weren't just the work of a few angry individuals. This was a common way for ordinary people to feel like they had some power, some recourse against injustice in a world where they often had very little. Did these curses work? In a way, they probably did, but not necessarily through supernatural means. The power of these curses was likely psychological. Imagine you stole a cloak from someone at the bathhouse. A few days later, you hear rumors that the victim has deposited a curse tablet in the sacred spring, calling on the powerful goddess Sulis Minerva to punish the thief with sleeplessness and disease until the cloak is returned. You might start to feel a bit anxious. Every time you have trouble sleeping or get a stomachache, you might think, oh no, the goddess is coming for me. The fear and guilt could be enough to make you anonymously return the cloak to the temple, just to be safe. In a society that deeply believed in the power of gods and curses, the belief itself was the mechanism that made them work. The tablets also created a social pressure. The act of publicly depositing a curse was a way of saying, I have been wronged, and I'm taking action. It could damage the reputation of a suspected thief, even if the curse had no real divine power. So the curse worked through gossip, fear, and social convention. It was a form of ancient supernatural neighborhood watch. But does that explain everything? The Romans were a practical people. Would they have continued this practice for centuries if it had zero effect? Is it possible that the intense, focused anger and intention inscribed on these tablets had some kind of real, subtle effect on the target, a kind of ancient psychic attack? What if the belief of the victim was just as important as the belief of the thief? If you truly believed a goddess was fighting on your behalf, would that give you the confidence and strength to confront your problems? Right, prayer tools from prayer to wishing on a star are just a different form of the same human impulse to ask a higher power for a little bit of help. Number 2 was a martial arts dynasty doomed. Some curses seem to target not just one person, but a family's male line. The story of the supposedly family curse is a modern tragedy that has haunted fans of martial arts cinema for decades. It centers on two of its brightest stars, Bruce Lee and his son, Brandon Lee. Bruce Lee was a global icon. He revolutionized martial arts and the way Asians were portrayed in Hollywood. He's the epitome of physical perfection and discipline, but in 1973, at the height of his fame, he died suddenly in Hong Kong at the age of 32. The official cause of death was cerebral edema, a swelling of the brain. It was attributed to an allergic reaction to a painkiller he had taken for a headache. But the circumstances were strange and his death was so unexpected that rumors and conspiracy theories immediately began to fly. One of the most persistent was that he was the victim of a family curse. The story of the curse claims that Bruce Lee's father believed his family was cursed and that demons were trying to take the firstborn sons. This is why, as a child, Bruce Lee was sometimes dressed as a girl and was given a female nickname, Little Phoenix, to confuse the spirits. Bruce Lee himself was said to have been haunted by a shadow demon in his dreams. Whether this is true or just part of the legend that grew after his death is unclear. But the idea of a curse lingered. 20 years later, the story took a horrifying turn. Bruce Lee's son Brandon Lee had followed in his father's footsteps and was a rising star. In 1993, he was filming what should have been his breakout movie, The Crow. He was 28 years old. In a tragic and bizarre accident on set, Brandon was shot and killed during a scene. A prop gun, which was supposed to be loaded with blanks, had a fragment of a dummy bullet lodged in the barrel from a previous scene. When the blank was fired, it propelled the fragment out of the barrel like a real bullet, striking Brandon in the abdomen. He died in the hospital a few hours later. The parallel was impossible to ignore. A father and son, both martial arts movie stars, both on the verge of massive international success, both dead under strange circumstances at a young age. The idea of a family curse seemed, to many, to be the only explanation that made sense. The death of Brandon Lee felt like the curse coming back to claim the next generation. The rational explanation for these two deaths is that they are two separate, unrelated tragedies. Bruce Lee's death, while shocking, has a plausible medical explanation. In 2022, a study published in the Clinical Kidney Journal proposed a new theory that the cerebral edema was caused by hyponatremia, a condition where the body has an abnormally low concentration of sodium in the blood. The researchers argued that Lee had multiple risk factors, including a high water intake, cannabis use, which can increase thirst, and a past kidney injury, which may have compromised his body's ability to excrete excess water. It's a scientific, not supernatural explanation. Brandon Lee's death was a catastrophic failure of onset safety protocols. It was a case of negligence, a 1 in a million accident that should never have happened. There is no need for a supernatural explanation when human error is so clearly to blame. But the story of the curse persists because the tragedy is so poetic and so symmetrical. The Crow is a movie about a man who comes back from the dead to avenge his own murder. The fact that Brandon died while making it adds a layer of dark irony that feels scripted. His father's fear of a curse, whether real or imagined, provides a ready-made narrative to explain the inexplicable. We want there to be a reason for such senseless loss, and a curse provides a reason, even if it's a terrifying one. Was the story of a curse something the family actually believed, or was it a story created by the media and fans to cope with the shock of their deaths? Could the immense pressure and stress of living up to the Bruce Lee legend have contributed to health problems or a sense of fatalism in the family? Or are there some families that are just magnets for tragedy, doomed to repeat patterns of loss through sheer heartbreaking coincidence? What if the curse was not a demon, but a genetic predisposition to a rare medical condition that affected both father and son? Number one, what? If the real curse is just being human? After looking at all these stories, from ancient pharaohs to modern movie stars, a pattern emerges. It's not a pattern of magic or supernatural revenge. It's a pattern of human nature. We are storytelling animals. We are desperate to find meaning in a world that is often chaotic and random. A curse is one of the most powerful stories we can tell. Think about it. What is a curse, really? It's an explanation for the unexplainable. Why did a healthy young man suddenly die? This must be the Pharaoh's curse. Why did a rich and powerful family fall into ruin? It must be the cursed diamond. Why did a successful baseball team fail for decades? It must be the goat. These stories are more satisfying, more memorable, and frankly more interesting than the probable truth that people get sick, accidents happen, and some sports teams are just bad for a long time. The skeptical explanations, confirmation bias, coincidence, the power of suggestion, statistical anomalies are almost always the right ones. Mark Nelson's study of the Tutankhamun curse victims showed no statistical significance. The curse of Tippecanoe is a pattern we impose on history after the fact. The poltergeist deaths are unconnected personal tragedies, but does that make the curses not real? The effects of these curses were very real. The belief in the curse of the Billy Goat created real psychological pressure on generations of Chicago Cubs players. The fear of Robert the Doll causes real people to write real letters of apology. The panic over the Crying Boy painting led to real bonfires. The belief in a curse can change human behavior. It can create stress, fear, and paranoia, which can in turn lead to illness, accidents, and poor decision-making. In this way, a curse can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you believe you are cursed, you might start acting like you are, and your life might just fall apart as a result. The story becomes the reality. So maybe the question isn't, did these curses actually work through supernatural means? Maybe the better question is, why do we need to believe in curses so badly? Perhaps it's a way of feeling like there is some order to the universe, even if it's a malevolent order. A curse implies that there are rules, that actions have consequences that can echo for centuries. That's a more comforting thought, in a strange way, than the idea that tragedy can strike anyone at any time for no reason at all. It's a way of coping with the terrifying randomness of life and death. The stories of these curses have survived for centuries, or become viral sensations overnight, not because of the ghosts or the magic. They survive because they are about us. They are about our deepest fears, fear of death, fear of disrespecting the dead, fear of injustice, and fear of losing everything we love. They are about our desire for justice, our need for narrative, and our endless search for meaning in the face of misfortune. The objects and the people in these stories are just the vessels. The real power, the real curse, comes from the stories we tell about them. So, are curses real? Probably not in the way we think, but are they powerful? Absolutely. They are as powerful as the human need to explain the world and our place in it. What if our collective belief is a form of energy that can actually influence events? If millions of people believe an object is cursed, could that directed thought have a tangible effect? Are there other, more subtle curses like negative self talk or generational trauma that affect our lives every day without us even realizing it? And what will be the next great curse story that we as a culture create to explain our next great tragedy?